Within the work I've produced since January for Unit 3 and 4, I have definitely been expanding and further developing on the concepts and ideas that I've been concerned with since the beginning of the course. Much of my work has revolved around the way we perceive the past and memory, the attachment of sentiment to this, and the deconstructing of the concept of nostalgia. These themes are all present in my Unit 2 work. However, in my more recent practical work, I feel as if I have become much more focused and articulate in expressing these messages I'm interested in, and through this my pieces have become much more able to speak for themselves. I think this has occurred through my development of a much more focused theoretical approach to my concepts. This has led to me gaining a much more cohesive and understandable methodical practice within my practical work. I've always been interested in photography, and I've tried to find ways to observe and explain this through my art, but now I've become interested in the practice of subjecting images to certain processes. One of these processes that I continually experimented with was selecting an original image I'm attracted to, most of the time sourced from old books, for reasons unrelated to its actual content, such as its composition of general shapes or texture or grain that is developed through the age of the film or the method it's been printed in. I would then enlarge and edit the contrast of this image by using a photocopier, then photocopy the photocopy and repeat this cycle. This was an especially interesting process when the source image was monochrome, as the photocopier adds its own grain and colour to the image by the machine's understanding of tone. When the images were distorted enough to seem really removed from their original photographs, I would then use them to take the work into another medium. Most of the time I developed it into either a drawing or a collage to take the piece through another stage and further away from the reality presented within the photograph. I think this work has been mostly focused on ways of looking and observing reality, and the different ways that this can be obscured by the mediation between the viewer and the content of the work itself. I think this clarification has also made my work more readable as a dissection of the capture of ephemeral life that photography allows us to see, and how we take this as reality even though it only gives us a glimpse of one precise moment in time. These elements are also a comment on the effect that the constant propagation of images has on our general view of the past, what exists as factual reality, and the influence of sentiment on this. My Unit 3 essay had a very large influence on this observation of these more precise themes. Looking at the work of Gerhard Richter and Christian Boltanski allowed me to observe artists that very clearly explored photography as a medium, that they made their own via manipulation of the viewer's idea of what photography represents. Both this and the idea of breaking down images to base abstract forms, which arose from coloured pencil drawings I produced within the architecture unit, were I think the biggest informers in how this unit culminated. At the beginning of the unit, when I felt I had less direction in my work, the pieces I was producing initially to me lacked some conviction and finality. To me they all seemed unfinished in a way that I couldn't understand. It became clear to me that this was due to an overstimulation of different materials and influences in the mediums, as well as a very vague idea of what I was trying to represent through these photographs. I think the point to which my work became more successful was when I stopped attempting to use photography to represent my themes and started using my themes and mediums to make work about photography itself. As well as focusing a lot on found images, I also brought my own photography into this unit. After shooting my first ever roll of film, I found it interesting to produce drawings and scans of these images in amongst my other pieces, in a way disguising them as found memories rather than my own, or making the found images seem much more personal depending on the perspective of the viewer. I think this relation to a projection of personal memories within my other works about nostalgia relates a lot to the more personal drawings I was producing in Unit 2 and can be seen as a development of them. In Unit 2 I was producing a lot of drawings from personal photographs that I placed in contrast with unrelated found photography to create new fabricated and voyeuristic context. Within this I was trying to explore false nostalgia and idealized fixation with the past and how I try to relate this to aspects of my own life. Since developing on this theme, I think my subsequent work in this unit has been more effective in combining my ideas from different sources and also simplifying what I was trying to achieve, so it effectively made more sense as a piece. Now, instead of trying to create an atmosphere and inflection that I think needed a lot more explanation than I gave it, I think my work is playing more with the perception of the viewer and the assumptions they make of the content of the pieces, rather than assuming they understand what I'm trying to convey emotionally. Still, I've been finding that juxtaposition and contrast with how I display pieces with each other is a very important part of my work. From allowing them to explain each other, or sometimes make less sense, as the different sources clash with each other and create false assumptions in meaning. This curatorial aspect of my studio-based work was something that I wanted to be prominent in my final piece, as well as the presence of multiple mediums that I have been exploring during the year. This is why I chose my work to be in 3 separate pieces that were each individual in their medium and size, as well as being sourced from a mix of both found photography and my own photos. I also made the point of not specifying this, simply letting the images and the mediums they're presented in speak for themselves and gather their own weight and assumption about authenticity, relation to each other, and what they're each representative of. I chose for my final piece to produce a collage, etching, and painting. I produced during the work in each of these mediums and lots of exploration. I decided that they had the best possibility for putting my source photographs through as many different processes as possible. For my painting, I decided to use a source image I had already experimented with that came from a Kodak projection slide of a family photo from the 60s that I brought secondhand. I took this to the darkroom and exposed it with an enlarger onto photo paper. This created a manipulated series of negatives that I played around with the quality of light and tone with. I then took these to the photocopier, where I enlarged them and experimented with tone further to bring out false colours and abstract the shapes further. This became the final source image for the piece, which I painted onto a wooden panel in oil, once again allowing me to blend and remove the image further from its original source. For my etching, I chose one of the original photographs of my film roll, an image I took in low light of my partner, which came out very grainy and fuzzy. I was drawn to this for an etching because I knew the grain would transfer interestingly to the plate and worked to obscure the image by letting the medium compress it into a new form. I printed the image onto acetate and transferred this to the plate by a light box, then went through the process of etching and aquatinting. When I finally printed the plate, I was not satisfied with the result because the image actually came out too obscured by the grain of the printing process. It was then that I decided to present the plate itself rather than the completed print. I actually came to prefer this as an idea for final presentation because it produced work in a new form on metal that looks really interesting. For the collage, I wanted to use images from as many sources as I've explored so far in this unit, so I took images from my own film photographs, the negatives I printed from the Kodak projection slides, the photo I printed onto acetate, and also photocopies I produced from a book. I took parts of each image that have muted tones and interesting grains to them and combined them in a way that shows no full forms or objects. Together as a 3, I think the pieces work interestingly in their differences. As the viewer works to make connections between them that don't fully exist, assumptions are created about the content of each work that are completely fabricated. The use of photographs without context creates a sense of certainty where there is none, as we are so used to images dictating the truth and our reality itself.